They told me I had ruined everything. And for a long time I believed them. My name is Ava. I was 15 when my world split in two. The before of ordinary teenage complaints and the after where the house that raised me felt like a stranger's living room. I was pregnant in 10th grade. When my parents found out, they made the decision that would define my life. They disowned me, packed a duffel of my things, and left me on the porch with the phone number of a women's shelter, a one-way look in my father's eyes, and the kind of shame that feels like a coat that never fits. If you're new here, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know the cities these stories reach. People imagine being kicked out is a sudden thing, like being dropped off at a bus station with money and a warning. It wasn't cinematic. It was a Wednesday night, paper plates from a cancelled dinner, and my mother's hands shaking so badly she could not find the words to explain why she'd chosen the other life. She said things like, "We have standards, and we can't be the kind of family people whisper about." My father said less. He folded his face into something that looked like resolve and walked out of the room. I stayed at the shelter for a month, long enough to realize the world does not end if you lose a home, but it does change shape. I learned how to fold diapers, how to stretch $1, how to talk to caseworkers who had seen this story 100 times but treated each woman like the single human being she was. I did my homework with a baby on my lap and a backpack of hand-me-down textbooks. People gave me food and shoes and a patchwork of kindness that felt like the first real law I'd ever been offered. If you ask, someone will sometimes help. The father of my baby, his name was Tom then, disappeared into excuses and phone screens. He wasn't cruel, he was cowardly. He called 2 or 3 times and then stopped. I didn't need chapters of betrayal to know what that meant. So I learned to be 2 people at once. The kid who wanted to finish high school, and the parent who learned everything practical that adulthood required. I worked evenings as a barista, took early classes, and learned how to manage a schedule like a chessboard so nothing important got left unguarded. School was an act of stubbornness. I walked into the auditorium on graduation day with a stroller parked by the back wall and a cap that had been bent into place by anxious fingers. People applauded and some smiled like they had permission to feel surprised. The principal shook my hand and whispered, "You made it." That 2-word sentence felt like a passport to a future I might not have had if I'd allowed shame to keep me small. The next 10 years were not dramatic in the way movies make them. They were long, patient work. I finished community college, then a state university, juggling scholarships and shifts. Then I apprenticed with a small interior shop that taught me the business side of design. My son, Noah, grew into a kid with a loud laugh and an appetite for questions. I learned to answer them without pretending I had all the maps. He learned to make sandwiches and read before school. We were scrappy and tender and mortal in the best ways. Slowly, little by little, my life changed. I started a tiny design firm that specialized in turning small apartments into efficient, beautiful spaces. Our town had a boom in small rentals. Young teachers, nurses, single parents, and they needed help that didn't require a trust fund. I marketed honesty, not glamour. My brand was practical beauty. I ran projects with transparency, clear invoices, and a willingness to work night schedules for clients who had children. People liked that. They recommended me. I did a dozen projects, then 20, then hired 2 assistants. Noah grew tall and wry with my accent and his laugh. Success was not a banner moment. It was a steady accrual of clients and trust. When the housing market folded in one corner, I pivoted to helping landlords make small improvements that raised rents affordably for working tenants, not speculators. When an old church needed a community room redone on a shoestring, I did it for cost because I remembered what it felt like to eat donated lasagna at a fellowship table and think, this could have been my whole life. And then, one afternoon, 20 years after I'd been pushed out of the house that used to be mine, my mother called. "Can you meet us?" she asked. She used words like meet, as if we were scheduling a coffee chat after a recital. I looked at Noah across the kitchen island where he was finishing homework. He was 17 and had never met his grandparents. He had questions about ancestry and annoyed curiosity about why his grandma had such a serious way of folding laundry. I put the phone on speaker so he could hear. He rolled his eyes and said, "Do you really want to see them?" It felt absurd, like the universe had paused and placed a new, dangerous prop into my tidy routine. "Why now?" I asked. We'd like to see our grandson," my mother said. The sentence landed like a stone. She did not say, "We're sorry," or "We want to apologize." She said, "We want to see our grandson," as if that could be the only transaction necessary to erase 2 decades of choices. I did not say yes. I did not say no. I said, "Come to the community center next Sunday. We have a volunteer event. Bring soap and canned goods if you mean it." It was a small test, practical and deliberate. I wanted to see whether their demand was a statement or a sacrifice. On social media, I watched the small suburban rituals of my life. A post about a weekend paint drive, a story about a low-cost makeover for a nurse, and I saw how carefully I had arranged my public life to be about people, not vindication. That was intentional. The center had been everything that had kept me human when my own family had chosen shame. They came to the drive with flowers in a vase and a foldable donation bag that looked new. My mother's hands shook, and her lipstick was a color that said she still cared about appearances. My father walked as if he were carrying a secret he had been instructed to keep tidy. They kept their distance and watched. My mother offered a small smile when a toddler dropped paint on her shoe, and the toddler's mother laughed it off. They tried to look like people who belonged to the scene. Noah noticed them first. He was the one who saw the old photos on my phone, pictures of my teenage self and his awkward dad, and the blank space in family albums where their faces might have fit. I taught him to ask questions. He asked quietly, "Are those my grandparents?" "Yes," I said, and my voice felt careful. "They are." People came up to them and asked what had brought them. Curiosity, not malice. They said they wanted to support the center. They offered money and a check written in an ink that looked like a peace offering. I accepted it and pocketed the receipt, proving they had followed through on at least one small action. That night, after the event, my mother asked to speak with me alone. We sat at the small table by the window where the light turned soft at dusk. She put her hands on the tabletop like a woman who had memorized how to be fragile. "Ava," she said, "we made mistakes. We were wrong. Noah is family. We're sorry." Her apology arrived like a warm thing, imperfect and late. I thought about the years of school concerts I'd attended without their applause, about the parent-teacher conferences where I had sat alone, about the nights I cooked meals and whispered to myself that tomorrow would be another day. I listened. I have been told in plenty of speeches that forgiveness is noble, but nobility alone cannot pay a child's tuition or put a roof over a shaken head. So I told them the truth I'd been living with for years. That apology mattered, yes, but action mattered more. I asked them to sign up to volunteer and to attend the oversight meetings that oversaw the distribution of donated funds. I asked them to stay consistent for 1 year, to let their presence be measured by effort rather than a single bright moment. They agreed quickly, perhaps eager to rebuild an image they had once sacrificed. For a few months, their presence was a season. They showed up for food drives, they sat in meetings and listened, and sometimes my mother cried quietly while labeling canned goods. Felt like progress. I watched them sweat in the summer heat and carry boxes with people who had once refused to give them a second glance. I nodded when they apologized in small ways and kept an eye on whether those apologies were followed by sacrifice. But then the second act unfolded, a truth I had to be ready for. My father needed help. Business had gone bad. His small landscaping company had taken a hit, and the people who'd once lent money were now calling his number. He came to me in a conversation that smelled of humility and finance. "We thought we could rebuild on our own," he said. "We miscalculated. We need to be part of Noah's life and to help out." I could have let him back in fully. I could have arranged weekly dinners that smoothed every wound. Instead, I remembered the balance I'd built. My life had its own economy now. Clients, employees who depended on my work, Noah's college savings. I refused to be the bridge for their financial collapse. I told them clearly, no unearned handouts. If they wanted to be family, they had to earn trust, not demand it. Then the gossip began. In a town that measures people by polite rumor, Someone began hinting that I was withholding family for show, that I was petty. Social media commentators wrote encouraging posts for reunification, and a local blogger invited them for a public family reconciliation piece. My father saw an opportunity to tidy his public image and said the words that cut like a draft. "If you won't let us see Noah without conditions, then we'll go to court." I'd known that line could be used. It was the old weapon of entitlement. Claim a right and let law do the rest. I called a lawyer not because I wanted a courtroom drama, but because I wanted to protect the life we had built. The lawyer explained custody basics and said, plainly, that grandparents can petition for visitation in our state, but the court would look at best interests and at the pattern of care over time. The day they filed their papers, our community center was holding a scholarship fundraiser for teens. I went to the podium and told the story of a child who needed a seat at the table. I read letters from parents whose lives the center had touched. I spoke with a steady voice because I had learned to make my anger useful, to protect, not to punish. The court hearing was not a spectacle. It was a box of paperwork and a judge who wanted to know where Noah slept, who paid for his insurance, and whether grandparents had a standing record of involvement. I laid out the facts. 2 decades of absence, the record of volunteer hours, the documented financial support they had offered this year that had been modest and late. The judge asked questions about motive. My mother's lawyer argued they had reformed. My father tried to speak to character. The judge looked at the ledger of our lives as if it were a map with clear routes. In the end, the judge ordered supervised visitation at the community center for 3 months, to be reviewed. It was not a full answer. It was a cautious one. In the hall afterward, my mother cried and thanked me. I accepted the gratitude the way you accept a hand offered over rubble, cautiously and with a measured step. Months passed. Supervised visits meant they sat in the library corner while Noah did homework. They learned to fold pizza boxes and to sit quietly during story hour. Sometimes they earned a smile. Sometimes they earned nothing. They had to reconstruct belonging from the ground up, not with words, but with presence that was consistent, not performative. The shock wasn't dramatic. It was quieter. The real reversal was not courtroom drama, but the way my life kept moving forward without requiring their every approval. Noah's senior portrait went up on the school wall with his goofy grin. My firm renovated 2 low-income units that housed a teacher and a nurse. My mother learned the pantry inventory system and became annoyingly efficient at categorizing cans. She baked muffins for volunteers and the volunteers liked them. My father worked with a small crew and learned how to use a spreadsheet, a mercy I did not expect to appreciate, but I did. In small ways, the past stopped defining every present decision. I forgave because it let me focus my energy on things that mattered. Noah's college application, the center's winter drive, the kind of steady work that cements a city's small civic life. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant choosing a different future, sometimes with them in it, sometimes not, depending on what the moment required. Years later, when Noah walked across the stage for his own graduation, my parents sat in the back pew, small and unsure but present. They clapped quietly, and my mother's hands hid a tissue. Afterward, we stood outside under a tree and the 3 of us, mother, daughter and grandson, looked at each other like people who had learned one of life's hard trades, to keep showing up until a new pattern feels inevitable. If there is a lesson here, and I tell it for the people who think revenge is the only language, it is this: being hurt does not obligate you to be cruel. Protect yourself first, yes. Set boundaries, insist on accountability. But when repair is sincere and steady, it is sometimes kinder to accept it in action rather than hold it as a trophy. And always, always, teach your child that dignity is not given by a name on a family tree but by the consistency of your care. If this story hit you, comment where you're watching from. I read every place. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life journeys that don't shy away from the hard parts.